I've been lucky enough in my life as an engineer, I would say probably half a dozen times I've been mixing a show and I've had a lump in my throat and a tear in my eye, and I've gone, I don't need to do anything to this now. I'm just going to sit and watch this show because everything is working.
Welcome to Audio Technology Magazine's ISO Booth podcast, where we phone audio engineers and producers at home, and thanks to the pandemic lockdown, they answer.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Audio Technology ISO Booth podcast. Today we have front of house engineer Anatole joining us. Anatole, thanks for your time.
No problem, thanks for having me.
So we have crossed paths a couple of times, and I think more often than not it's been while you've been mixing front of house for Guy Sebastian.
Yep.
Yes, you've done all sorts of other things, festivals and other tours with artists. But obviously with the recent changes to the live industry, you've managed to keep yourself busy with a home studio project, and that's what we're keen to talk about today. So why don't you first just tell us a bit about what your life has looked like over the last 10 weeks, and I guess how what the change looked like for you when everything went into lockdown and so on.
Yeah, I think it's probably a fairly common story for people in our industry that everything pretty much stopped almost immediately. I was pretty lucky that I had just finished a tour with Conrad Sewell. It went for about 8 weeks. So I was very fortunate that I had a good chunk of work at the start of the year, and we managed to get the last show done the night before everything got uprooted. So managed to have a little bit in the bank. They paid on time, and everything sort of went smoothly from that point. But as of the 14th of March, basically from the 14th of March and up until my next booking, which is the 23rd of September, longest time off I've had since I was about 4 years old, I would say. So it's a bit daunting to think that there's not much by the way of income happening for that long, and it's kind of scary to think how am I going to be when I actually do go back into a big gig and get on the tools again. I haven't touched anything for potentially 6 months, haven't tuned a big rig or played with some of these consoles for a while. There'll be a bit of head scratching going on, I'm sure, but I'll probably won't be alone. There'll be a lot of lighting guys and vision guys standing around trying to figure out how to use their gear again as well.
Yeah.
I've definitely kind of been as proactive as I can in my own scenario, as in not sort of out there trying to reinvent the wheel or looking for work, more just making the most of the lack of work to concentrate on a studio build at home, which I meant to do a good year and a half ago, or I've been meaning to do since then, and just life gets in the way of your little projects, and before you know it, a year and a half's gone by, and I really haven't had much of an excuse other than luckily being busy. So making the most of that. Obviously it's costing money that I'm not recuperating at the moment, but it's definitely something I was always planning to do. So there's no better time to get stuck into it, and then just hope that the work comes back and it pays for itself eventually. Yeah,
for sure. There is something about being productive, even if you're not getting paid for it. It's therapeutic in itself, I think. Just keeping busy.
I think that's
helps keep you sane.
That's probably what a lot of people, not necessarily even in our industry, but a lot of people that have been affected, which is why you see Bunnings is probably going to post record profits over these last few months, because everyone is getting around to doing those little projects. I'm doing the home studio thing. I know other people are doing, planter boxes or skylights or you name it. People are getting around to having a go. I think probably at the end of all this, the tradies are going to be the real winners, because they're going to be coming back and fixing up all the dodgy work that everyone's tried to do themselves.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So why don't you just tell us about your home studio and the size of the space and the extent of the build?
Yep. The space is pretty small. It's not intended to be a recording studio. It's more meant to be a mixing and overdubs. I would like to try my hand at some mastering. Obviously, mastering's its own beast, and you can't take it for granted that if you can mix, you can master. My years as a musician and releasing 7 or 8 albums, I've obviously been in mastering suites often, and often enough to kind of get a vibe of what they do. So I'm going to give it a crack. I'm not expecting anything to kind of take off immediately, but I'd like to have that as a potential, and the space being only small is kind of good to cater towards. It's predominantly going to be me or a musician or a producer doing sort of overdubs, or the main sort of focus will be to do live records. So working with the bands I work with or festivals, or offer the live record capability, then bring it in here to mix down and overdub anything that needs to be sort of fixed. So there's enough room for me and say 2 other people to be in here doing some overdubs, and say an artist and a producer to do some things. It was formerly just a little office space. I wanted to take over the garage to make it a bigger space and sort of be able to do full band records, but for the sake of losing the entire garage, which basically is now full of all gear and all sorts of other stuff anyway, I thought let's just kind of keep it tight, compact, and sort of efficient. This is a pretty perfect space. It's only sort of 3 meters by about 2.5 meters. So not huge, but big enough to fit some good gear in and a couple of people.
Yeah. So what have you done to this space to get it sounding good?
So my main concern being at home was sound getting out and sound getting in. So basically in the background you can see the ceiling. I basically went up into the ceiling and put a couple of layers of acoustic bats, one fairly dense polyester acoustic bats, and then another one more of a fiberglass based acoustic bat, and there's a layer of rubber in the ceiling as well. Luckily the depth was about 230 mil, so it was deep enough to get both layers of acoustic bats in there and a layer of rubber. Then on the underside of the gyprock that was there, once I patched that back up, another layer of the same rubber. It's about a 1.5 mil acoustic rubber, and then another layer of gyprock, which is actually it's called Firestop. It's 16 mil heavy duty gyprock. It's very heavy, but we managed to get up there and just there's 1,000 screws into the beams. So the ceiling is pretty well insulated as far as sound propagating up. Obviously, if someone banging on the ceiling or banging on the floor above, it transfers through the beams. But for the sake of if someone was to watch a movie upstairs loud, I wouldn't hear him. Or if I'm going to be mixing in here at a reasonable volume for a little bit, it shouldn't propagate upstairs too badly. And I treated all the sort of 2 external walls and one of the internal walls in a similar manner with a double layer of the Firestop gyprock, and then the one wall that goes into the house that could potentially cause issues going up the sort of stairwell. Luckily, there's a funny little bulkhead in one corner, which is about a foot from the original wall. So basically, I thought rather than keep that bulkhead, I'll just fill that right across. So I've got about a foot worth where there ended up being 5 layers of gyprock, 3 layers of insulation bats. I'll have to give you a quick look at the door setup. So basically I've gone the usual sort of studio double door vibe.
Yep.
You can see this one here. Still yet to kind of paint it and do all that up. But once these 2 are closed with the full-on perimeter of rubber sealant, even on the threshold, so I've gone the full perimeter, so it does shut quite, once they're all in and some panels on the inside, that'll come up, that should be super effective on the inside. And then just sort of for the room treatment itself, I've got some quite nice panels here that I just found online of the secondhand sort of home theatre stuff where
Right.
they're reflective in that the wood is polished. I'll just turn it around again. So it's not completely dead. There's a bit of reflection on the polished wood, but obviously you can see there's holes in it. So behind there is, I don't know if you can see it in there, but there's sort of fairly dense foam behind there, so that's pretty absorbent.
Yeah.
And then just the usual sort of egg carton stuff. I don't know how well you can see that there on the walls, and some other treatment up in the ceiling there. It's come up pretty well. I did a lot of that just yesterday.
Okay.
And now it's got there'll be a bit of carpet on the floor and stuff to kind of. I don't want it super dead because obviously I'm not looking for anechoic chamber. I want a bit of life to it, but I want it to be. I don't want this space, if I'm recording a vocalist in here with the sort of the screen. I don't want the space to have too much play on the sound. I want to be able to add that in later. And then obviously for mix down, I want it to be as sort of tight as I can get it.
Yeah.
I do have the ability with these panels, if I'm finding they are still a bit reflective, I can just stick some more foam on top of them. But at the moment, without any carpet and with the big window still exposed, it's tighter than I thought it would be. So I'm pleasantly surprised by it all.
Cool. Yeah. So once the acoustic treatment's all finished, what do you plan on running? What's your DAW setup, interface, all of that?
Yep. So I'm kind of become a bit of a Waves converter of recent times, in that I had to buy some plugins for a tour with Belinda Carlisle last year. And I was kind of like, I've used them on and off. I've never really owned any. And I was sort of like, if I'm going to buy a bunch of plugins for this run, because they wanted me to, they didn't bring a front of house guy, so asked me to do that run, but said back in the UK and in the States they run these plugins. So I went, oh, well, I might as well just got to buy half a dozen of them, or might get a bundle. Luckily, he's got some great hookups at Waves, hooked me up with an amazing bundle deal. So now I've got more plugins than I'd ever know what to do with.
Yeah.
So essentially, I'm going to be running the DAW's going to be Logic with Waves Studio Rack running alongside it for all the sort of plugin processing. The interface will be the IO's a DigiGrid iOS, so it's got the Wave server inbuilt.
Right.
It's 8 in, 8 out. I don't really need it to be much more than that, but obviously with the Waves, you just network it to more IO if I need to down the line. But as I said, most of my stuff will be recorded off-site and then brought in here to mix down. I've got I've got two really nice pairs of Neumann monitors, and a pair of Avantones. So I've got the KH 310s, which are digital three-way Neumanns, and the KH 120s, which are two-way analog. I just wanted to get 2 or 3 pairs of monitors so you can switch between and have a good sort of. I think between those 3 sets of monitors, several sets of cans, and the fact that I will have once it all starts up again, I'll have access to decent PAs. I'll have a pretty good array of listening devices to really go, okay, because quite often you might be sort of almost ready to master, and then I'll get people come and give me a track put on a system, and it's kind of, okay, maybe 2 bottom head, and this is like obviously with a system that's pretty well tuned by that point, you might start thinking, okay, it's the vocals aren't as present as I hope they might be, or often these days I think people get a bit can get a bit carried away with putting too much bass into their mix to kind of, because they may be compensating with a room or speakers that aren't really doing it that well, and then when you put it on a big system that has a lot of sub in it, you go, okay, that's kind of a bit too much. So I'm kind of lucky in that when I do get to the point of, all right, we're ready to almost print this, let me take it on a couple of bigger live shows and just whack it in the sort of once tuning's done, if I get a spare minute between sound check and show, just to give you a good idea of, you know, how it will translate from the room it's mixed into, you know, to a bigger environment. And obviously the kind of car stereo test is always a good one as well. So I think across the board, I wanted to have several different listening, several speaker setups in here that were different enough to highlight different things. And then take them out on the road as WAVs and give them a shot through some decent systems.
Yeah, cool.
And then I've got the dual screen set up so I can have Logic all at one time and the Wave stuff at another time. Got a PreSonus sort of, basically it's just a single fader controller to control all the, so it's a lot easier just to fire, you know, loop, just a lot quicker just to control off that. And then a nice, I ended up going a Drama speaker control, just so I can literally go, okay, these are my A speakers, these are my B speakers, these are my C, and just click, click, click straight across rather than having to muck around internally. It's going to hopefully pretty quick. And then just a bunch of sort of MIDI keyboards and some drum machines and stuff. I've got an old electronic Roland kit that I'm going to set in the corner here somewhere, and because I was a drummer way back when, so I wouldn't mind kind of partly mixing other guys' stuff, but also it'd be nice to get creative again. And if I'm a notoriously bad sleeper, so in the middle of the night, rather than annoying my wife, I might as well just come down here and make some noise.
Yeah, that's the dream, isn't it? Have your own lair that's completely soundproofed. You're not going to wake anyone up.
It's my man cave.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. My wife thinks it's quite sinister how soundproof it's going to be. She's not entirely sure of my motives, but I'm not entirely sure yet either.
We'll just have to wait and see. So, has recording always been a love of yours? I know you've been on tour a lot and doing a live thing, but what started the studio side of things?
I started in the studio.
Okay.
So I was educated in the studio at the Australian Institute of Music. Did a diploma, 2-year diploma there, and then it was kind of a bit of an unwritten law that if you graduated top of that year, you kind of went on to assist the following year. So I was pretty lucky to assist at the Institute's main recording studio there, which back in the day was the old Rhinoceros Records, which was actually set up by InXS. So the room was amazing, and they had some really top gear. Unfortunately, a couple of years later, they then stepped up from the Tascam they had to an SSL, which I was like, there's probably one channel strip of that I own in my fees that I paid to be there for 2 years. But I was kind of a little bit early in getting my hands on that board. But so assisting in there was a good eye-opener as to how it's really done. Like, obviously, there's so much you can learn in a lecture hall or, you know, sort of recording student bands. But when I was lucky enough to help out on Cold Chisel's Last Wave of Summer, did a Leonardo's Bride album in there. I assisted a few other little bits and pieces, which quite, you know, saw good engineers come in and saw how they approached everything quite differently. It then sort of transpired that there was a lot, like, obviously I assisted on probably, say, 5 albums across that year, which is not a lot of work, right? So I kind of started thinking I had other friends that had graduated similarly, and other people playing in bands at the same time as me, and the live scene just seemed to be just a lot more there was a lot more work out there doing live. So I just sort of stumbled across working for a couple of small PA companies on the weekends, started doing a bit of corporate stuff during the week, and I kind of started at that point. I'd moved out of home and I was paying rent and stuff, so I was like, I need to make more money than the sort of assisting in the studio was getting me. So it's always been something I wanted. It's in the background. It's always been something I wanted to get back into. And the whole start in the whole music game was as a drummer in several bands, touring bands back in the day. So it'd be nice to get back on the kit and get creative. It's probably, I hope it doesn't turn out to be a very expensive hobby, but it's at least something it's keep at this point anyway. It's keeping me relatively sane.
Yeah, that's good. So I guess with all the changes that have happened lately to the live industry, you said obviously quite a lot of work has been cancelled, and you now have a booking for next July, and you've never booked that far out ahead. But I'm sure many other people are in a similar boat, especially freelancers who relied on touring market and all that. Where do you think things will ever look like they used to for people like yourself?
I don't know. Like there's a lot of talk about the sort of streaming thing being sort of the new norm. I don't see it being the new norm. I see it as being definitely a new arm or a new string on in the bow. I just don't see it. Nothing can replace the atmosphere or the vibe of a live crowd in front of a rockin' band. Like, I've been lucky enough in my life as an engineer, I would say probably half a dozen times I've been mixing a show and I've had a lump in my throat and a tear in my eye, and I've gone, I don't need to do anything to this now. I'm just going to sit and watch this show because everything is working. And you can't, obviously I've watched concerts on TV and I've enjoyed them, or I've watched sporting events on TV and I've got right in there when my team's about to score. But you put yourself in the grandstand or in the on the floor of the entertainment center, and no TV, no online, no experience can come close to the experience of being with your friends, probably a couple of beers under your belt, having an amazing time. Like I see this sort of the streaming and the reaching out to larger audiences as a new avenue to become part of the system. But it's nothing can replace the real thing, So it's going to take a long time to get back there, and obviously this sort of the streaming things that are available now are going to create a bit of, obviously hope create work and keep people on the tools and just keeping the ball rolling, albeit kind of slowly. I think obviously the virtual world and so forth could probably equate quite well to corporate. We don't necessarily need, corporate world doesn't really need the vibe, the sporting arena and the big gigs, they need the vibe of the live audience, whereas corporate is a lot more sort of matter of fact. It's sort of more, not statistical, but you know what I mean? They're very much sort of, here's a product, or here's something we're trying to get out there. And a lot of them already had the live stream. A lot of them already had, phone link-ups, satellite link-ups. They already had all that integrated. They just were doing it in a big space with, sometimes 5,000 or 6,000 people in the room. So they don't need that audience. They might be taking questions from the audience, but they're not taking 5,000 questions. They're taking half a dozen and then going to phone questions, or going to questions that might be coming in on via the Yammer or any one of those sort of interactive polling sort of software programs. So I think the corporate side of things will probably continue on with this sort of new virtual scenario, and they'll probably do quite well out of it. And corporate is a good 50% of my sort of annual income, so I can't refute it, or I can't, certainly not mocking it in any way, because it's without the corporate world, the sort of rock and roll world wouldn't exist. Production companies wouldn't be able to afford to just work rock and roll. They need their corporate dollars. So I think the scene has changed on both accounts. The corporates will probably manage this a little better, whereas the rock and roll side of things is going to take a bit longer to get back there. But once it does, I think, you know, everyone's going to be pretty happy about, you know, singing their favourite song with a bunch of their mates in front of their favourite band, you know.
For sure.
You just can't. If you're going to do that, you might as well just buy the DVD and watch it at home.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Well, thanks very much for your time today, Anatole. It was great seeing what you've been up to.